the stranger at the window. That night, the rain poured relentlessly, and the wind howled through the cracks, making the entire house shudder. I lived alone in a 2-story house on the outskirts of a small town in the United States, where the nearest neighbor was a few hundred yards away. Usually, I loved rainy days for the cozy feeling of being indoors, but tonight, something felt off. Around 10 p.m., I was sitting on the sofa, engrossed in a book. The rhythmic tapping of rain against the window was occasionally interrupted by loud rolls of thunder. I was nearing the end of the book when I suddenly heard a faint tapping sound, like someone gently knocking on the window. At first, I thought it was a tree branch brushing against the glass due to the strong wind, but the sound came again, clearer this time. What was strange was that the knocking was coming from the 2nd-story window, a place no one could easily reach. I stood up and cautiously climbed the stairs. The cold wood of the steps sent chills through my feet, and my heart began to race. As I approached the 2nd-story window, I carefully pulled back the curtain. The dim streetlight outside cast a faint glow through the glass, but there was nothing there. I exhaled in relief, convincing myself it was just my imagination. Returning to the living room, the uneasy feeling lingered. I checked all the doors and windows on the 1st floor, ensuring they were securely locked. Then, I made myself a cup of tea, trying to relax. But less than 15 minutes later, the tapping sound returned, this time more urgent and insistent. The blood drained from my face. This time, I didn't go back upstairs. Instead, I turned on the living room lights to push back the darkness. As the light illuminated the staircase, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The shadow of a person faintly outlined on the wall, cast by the streetlight outside. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to ascend the stairs, one step at a time. When I reached the 2nd-story window, I found it slightly ajar, though I was certain I had closed it earlier. A cold breeze swept into the room, making the curtains billow violently. I slammed the window shut and locked it, but the sensation of being watched didn't leave me. I hurried back downstairs, trying to stay calm. I grabbed my phone to call the police, but just then, the lights in the house flickered and went out completely. Heavy footsteps echoed from upstairs, deliberate and unmistakable. In a panic, I bolted out of the house, jumped into my car, and drove straight to the local police station. When officers arrived to investigate, they found the house empty, but the 2nd-story window was wide open again. What unsettled me the most was what they found outside. A wooden ladder leaning against the house and wet footprints leading from the window into the house. I couldn't sleep that night at the police station. Even though they assured me there was no one in the house, I still felt like unseen eyes were on me. The next morning, I decided to hire a private investigator to uncover what was going on. The investigator, Mr. Davis, was a man in his 50s with an unassuming demeanor but sharp, perceptive eyes. He began by inspecting the entire house and its surroundings. When he reached the 2nd-story window, he pointed out a small scratch on the wooden frame, as if someone had tried to pry it open. "Do you know anything about the history of this house?" Mr. Davis asked. I shook my head. "I moved here about a year ago. The previous owner didn't mention anything unusual. There might be something they didn't want you to know. I'll dig into it," he replied. Over the next few days, Mr. Davis delved deeper into the house's past. What he uncovered made my skin crawl. Over a decade ago, a young woman who lived here had mysteriously disappeared. The police had investigated but found no leads. Some locals believed she had been abducted, while others whispered that the house was haunted. "I think we need to learn more about this woman," Mr. Davis suggested. Mr. Davis discovered that the missing woman's name was Sarah, an art teacher at a local high school. She had lived alone and was described by neighbors as kind but often mentioned feeling like she was being watched. Before her disappearance, she had reported strange occurrences to the police. Someone knocking on her windows at night, though no evidence of an intruder was ever found. One evening, I received a call from Mr. Davis. "I think I've found something important. Can you meet me at Sarah's old house?" I agreed, though my nerves were frayed. When I arrived, Mr. Davis showed me a journal he had found hidden in a small compartment in one of the walls. The journal detailed Sarah's experiences with the nightly disturbances and her growing paranoia. The last entry read, "I know he's coming back. I just hope I'm strong enough to face him." As I read through the journal, I felt a chilling realization that Sarah's story was repeating itself with me. But what horrified me most was a photograph tucked between the pages. A man standing in the shadows, only half of his face illuminated by faint light. Mr. Davis speculated that this could be the person responsible for Sarah's disappearance. We decided to stake out my house at night to see if the intruder would return. Hours passed in silence, with only the sound of rain and wind outside. But around midnight, the tapping on the second-story window began again. We rushed upstairs with flashlights, but when we opened the window, only the cold night air greeted us. However, on the floor, we found a note scrawled in jagged handwriting. "I'm back." The story doesn't end here, but one thing is clear. The figure haunting my house isn't just a man. He is the embodiment of darkness and the secrets this house has tried to bury. And now, whether I like it or not, I've become a part of his story. The flashlight in the forest. I have always enjoyed running in the evenings after work. There is something calming about the cool night air and the solitude of the streets when most people are winding down for the day. That particular night, the rain had just stopped, leaving the air crisp and refreshing. It felt like the perfect opportunity to take my usual route through the small forest near my house, a path I had run countless times before. First, everything seemed normal. I put on my headphones, started my favorite playlist, and began jogging along the damp dirt trail. The world around me was alive with the sounds of insects chirping and the occasional rustle of leaves as the breeze whispered through the trees. It was peaceful, almost serene, and I felt at ease. About 20 minutes into my run, though, something shifted. At first, it was subtle. The music in my headphones seemed to fade, drowned out by a sound that wasn't part of my playlist. Footsteps. They were faint but distinct, and they didn't match the rhythm of my own. Slower, heavier. Someone or something was following me. I stopped abruptly and pulled out my earbuds, standing completely still to listen. The footsteps stopped too. The forest was silent, save for the rustling leaves and distant croak of a frog. I scanned the darkened trees with the weak beam of my wrist flashlight but saw nothing unusual. Convincing myself it was just my imagination, I resumed running, though my pace quickened slightly. The footsteps returned, louder this time and closer. My pulse quickened as fear began to creep in. I turned sharply, shining my flashlight into the dense woods behind me, but the light only illuminated the nearest trees and underbrush. "Hello? Is someone there?" I called out, my voice wavering slightly. No answer. I turned back and pressed forward, this time running faster, my breaths coming in short gasps. As I approached a fork in the path, something caught my eye. A beam of light flickered ahead, cutting through the darkness. It was unmistakably the beam of another flashlight. I froze, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out every other sound. The light disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. "Who's there?" I shouted, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. Silence. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, but the thought of whoever or whatever was behind me made the decision for me. I took the left fork, hoping it would bring me closer to the edge of the forest. As I ran, the flashlight beam reappeared, this time even closer. It darted between the trees like it was being carried by someone who didn't want to be seen. Panic surged through me. I stumbled, nearly falling, but caught myself and kept moving. "Stay away from me," I yelled. My voice echoed in the emptiness of the forest. Then I heard it, a voice, low, gruff, and uncomfortably close. "Why are you running? Don't be afraid." The words sent a chill down my spine. They hadn't come from in front of me where the flashlight had been. They came from behind. I didn't dare look back. Every instinct in my body told me to keep running, to get out of the forest as fast as I could. The path finally began to incline upward, a sign that I was nearing the forest's edge. But the flashlight's beam now danced wildly in front of me, blocking my escape. I skidded to a halt, my chest heaving, as the light grew brighter and more blinding. I shielded my eyes and screamed, "Who are you? What do you want?" For a moment, the light disappeared. Then, everything went eerily silent. No footsteps, no voices, just the sound of my own ragged breathing. Gathering what little courage I had left, I took a tentative step forward. That's when I heard it again, the voice now impossibly close to my ear. "You shouldn't have come here." I bolted. Adrenaline overpowered every other sensation as I sprinted toward the faint glow of streetlights in the distance. The path seemed to stretch endlessly, but I didn't stop. Not until I burst out of the trees and into the safety of my neighborhood. I collapsed onto the sidewalk, gasping for air, and looked back. The forest was dark and still, as if nothing had happened. The next morning, I reported the incident to the local police. They took my statement seriously and sent a team to investigate. They found footprints along the path, confirming that someone had indeed been in the forest. But beyond that, there were no clues, no evidence of a flashlight, no signs of anyone lurking in the woods. That was months ago. I haven't set foot in that forest since. I've taken to running during the day on well-populated streets. But sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the world is still, I think about that voice and those footsteps. I wonder who they belong to and why they were following me. And I wonder if they're still out there, waiting for me to return. The crying in room 214. Last week, I traveled for a work assignment to a small, unassuming town in the northeastern United States. The place was quiet, with a lingering sense of history etched into its streets and buildings. My company booked me into a quaint, vintage hotel just off the highway. It was a tall, stately structure built in the early 1900s, with faded red bricks and a once grand facade that now bore the weathered touch of time. When I arrived, the storm had already set in. Sheets of rain poured relentlessly, drumming against the car windows as I pulled up to the entrance. Inside, the lobby was eerily quiet. The reception desk was manned by a middle-aged woman with a polite but weary demeanor. As I checked in, she gave me a peculiar look. "You're our only guest tonight," she said, her voice low. "The storms kept most folks away. It'll just be you and the night staff." She hesitated for a moment, then added, "If you need anything, call the front desk. We'll be here." Her words settled uneasily in my mind as I made my way to my room, number 214, on the second floor. The hotel felt larger than it appeared from the outside, and the hallways stretched long and dim, illuminated by soft, flickering sconces. The faint scent of old wood and something metallic lingered in the air. My room was comfortable enough. A queen-sized bed with a floral bedspread, a small desk, and a vintage armchair by the window. After unpacking, I freshened up and prepared to unwind for the night. The storm outside showed no sign of letting up, and the howling wind added an ominous undertone to the rain. Just as I was settling into bed, I heard it, a faint, muffled sound. At first, I dismissed it as the storm, the wind, perhaps, slipping through some unseen crack in the old building. But as the minutes passed, the sound grew clearer. It wasn't the wind. It was crying. It was faint, almost like a whisper, but distinctly human. I froze, my ears straining to catch every nuance. The sound seemed to come from the hallway. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe one of the staff was upset, or perhaps someone else had checked in without my knowledge. But the receptionist had been clear. I was the only guest. Curiosity got the better of me. I slid out of bed, threw on a hoodie, and stepped into the hallway. The crying was louder now, but the hallway was empty, shrouded in shadows. It seemed to be coming from the far end, near room 230, the last room on the floor. My footsteps echoed softly as I walked toward the sound. "Hello," I called, my voice shaky. "Is someone there?" No response. The crying stopped abruptly, leaving a heavy silence that made my skin crawl. I stood there for a moment, staring at the door to room 230, before retreating to my own room. Back inside, I locked the door and slid the security chain in place. It took a while for my heart to stop racing. But the night wasn't over. At exactly 3 a.m., I was jolted awake by a sound so close it made my blood run cold. The crying was back, louder and more desperate, and it was right outside my door. My heart pounded as I stared at the doorknob, which was slowly turning, rattling as though someone was trying to open it. I couldn't move. Every muscle in my body locked in place as I waited, half expecting the door to burst open. But it didn't. After a few agonizing minutes, the sound stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. Morning couldn't come fast enough. As soon as the sun rose, I dressed quickly and made my way to the lobby. The receptionist was there, looking as if she hadn't slept a wink. "Did you hear anything last night?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She hesitated, her eyes flicking toward the hallway behind me. "Room 230, she said quietly. "You heard it, didn't you?" I nodded, feeling a chill creep up my spine. She sighed and motioned for me to sit down. "A few years ago, a woman checked into that room. She was traveling alone like you. The staff found her a few days later. She'd taken her own life. Ever since then, people have reported hearing crying at night. Sometimes they see the doorknob turn, or they feel a presence in the hallway." I stared here, speechless. My mind raced, replaying the events of the night before. The receptionist's face softened, and she placed a comforting hand on my arm. "We've had priests bless the room, and we've even tried closing it off. But no matter what we do, the crying comes back. It's like she's still here, stuck in that moment." I checked out immediately. The storm had subsided, and the sun shone weakly through the dispersing clouds. As I drove away, the hotel's shadow loomed large in my rearview mirror. Even now, the sound of that desperate, mournful crying lingers in my mind, a haunting reminder of a night I will never forget. If you ever find yourself traveling through a small town and staying in an old hotel, listen closely. If you hear crying in the middle of the night, it might be worth keeping your door locked and staying in bed. Some spirits, it seems, are not so easily laid to rest.
Thanks for listening to today's story. Let us know what you think. If you want to hear more scary stories, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode when we upload it. We'll always be here and welcome you.